Made to Measure, our new live series that delivers a quick hit of digestible insight directly into your event ears once a month.
Before we get started, before we start talking about sports, the sports industry and what we can learn from it, David, I've got a bit of pointless, irrelevant trivia for you. So for those of you that have actually seen us do this before, how we like to start is I will come up with a totally irrelevant question to throw my host off the scent. And David, it's you obviously with us today. So your question is this. And feel free as well, everyone in the audience, to comment your answers in the chat box as well. David, we're talking about the sports industry today and what we can learn. But my question is for you. How many people do you think watched the Super Bowl in the US earlier this month?
Ooh, that's a great question. A lot of us, that's for sure. How specific do you need me to be?
I'll give it to you to the nearest 10 million because I'm feeling kind.
10 million. So what, there's like 300 million of us in total. Maybe slightly more than half. I don't know. Maybe we'll go for 100 million. I have no idea.
So close. We've got someone in the chat saying that they did. So Karen did, but unfortunately not 100 mil, but very close. It was 113. So you were 13 million out.
All right.
You were pretty close. And by contrast then, how many people do you think, Dave, watched the FIFA World Cup final at the end of last year?
Ooh, can we go for 300 million? At least triple. I mean, this is The Price is Right. I want to win the showcase, so I can't go over. So maybe we'll go 300 million.
Okay. Any other guesses from any of our audience members? 300 million David's gone for. The answer is 1.5 billion.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Absolutely huge, which sets us off quite nicely because if you think about those numbers, imagine engaging 1.5 billion people in essentially 90 minutes of content. That is fantastic. And that's one of the starting points for us today. But it's now time for us to start talking about the real topic itself. What can we learn from the sports industry? And David, I would suggest we both put 15 minutes on our timers. So I'm going to do that there. So everybody can see we are keeping to the clock today. We're going to talk about this in 15 minutes. Let's go. And to start the story and to set the scene, I want to talk a little bit about why it's important for us to learn from the sports industry. So cross-industry innovation, we know it's not a new phenomenon. It's par for the course. And there is that old business adage that tells us, think outside the box. But actually, don't just think outside the box, look outside the box. And in a world where so many large organizations return to this silo mindset and fail to look beyond their business units for answers and inspiration, looking outside the box can be really helpful. What we can do as an events industry is really adapt what industries outside of the events world have already done in an effective way to drive real positive change with less risk. And you don't have to look much further than the sports industry to find this glow of inspiration. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. 3 things that we could learn from the sports industry. And David, I know you're going to start us off. So let's start with number 1. What's the first thing that we can learn from the sports industry?
Yeah, number 1, communities. You kind of hit on it. There was almost a community of 1.5 billion people that watched the World Cup. But I think in the sports industry, we've seen a ton of studies and research focused into the economic impact that the sports industry has on communities, but much less so into actually what creates the community. And I think that's kind of what I'd like to focus on here, as an event industry podcast. But there's several studies that have stood up to the test of time that we'll draw from. But they really define community, or this sense of community, as characteristics that lead members to feeling a sense of belonging, attachment, as well as shared faith and interests and common goals and values. So again, that's a really, really, really broad thing, but the sports industry's absolutely nailed it in regards to community. Think about it. Fanhood is community. And the amount of money that fans spend to support their teams, myself included, it's silly. So we can't ignore it. But what can we do to kind of replicate it, at least to some degree, here as event organizers? So there's a couple kind of pillars that emerge from the research when it comes to developing this sense of community. Let me bounce a couple of those off of you and just turn the mic back over. And these are three that I thought were the most core to what we do, but it's this idea of common interests, goals, and values. In sports, it's so easy. It's the group dynamics, the social networking, the friendships that result because people are brought together because they're all interested in this sport or watching it or playing it. It's this common interest. Number one, that's something we can leverage. Number two, sports do a great job at leveraging social spaces, just common areas or facilities where individuals can interact with each other, where you can foster engagement. And then the third one is voluntary action. In the community, when members join and do things on their own free will with no incentive or tangible pressure, a greater sense of community is fostered. So when you look at common interests and social spaces and voluntary actions, well, I went down to the pub to watch the World Cup at 10 a.m. with my buddies, and we had all paid like $150 for our kits, and then God knows what on the tab, just to watch this game in a social space, all under our own volition. So that's kind of how sports is using these fundamentals. But I'm kind of curious what you think about the event industry and these different pillars of community development.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think someone in the chat has also just said something quite similar. Karen said community is huge, and it's a little easier to build community around recreational industries like sports, gaming. Sometimes it's harder to build as a B2B company, and that's exactly what I was thinking when you first started saying that, David. Was there are some shows, particularly over in the UK, huge flagship events like bodybuilder shows or gaming events is a great example. And you will get hordes and hordes of people buying tickets in advance, turning up outside, wearing the merchandise. And really, that's just an event model that they've managed to create a community out of. They've managed to create a brand. They've managed to bring in inspirational figures to almost represent that brand and be somebody that people that attend that event aspire to be or look up to or feel like they can learn from. And I found that being able to have role models is another thing that can really enhance this community feel within events. And we see it in sports all the time, don't we? I mean, Serena Venus Williams, a really great example. And because they represent more diverse communities as well, it's a case of, come on, let's get people to be the figureheads of our brand, of our events, of our sporting brand. And that's going to bring in from grassroots more folks who really want to engage with us, want to turn up, and most importantly, want to pay money. I think that's the important thing. Are there any other examples of anyone doing it well that you've seen out there who've used that kind of sports model?
I just think across the board, really in professional sports or here in the States, college sports, this idea of fanhood, it's just leveraged to a great degree to where people feel almost as if they're part of the team. I know that's something we could never take to the event industry, but I think it's these pillars of we do have an audience, and within that audience, there will be common interests that we could potentially leverage to foster more engagement. We can potentially understand our audience better and what their objectives and goals are to create social spaces that foster those things better. And again, I think if we do all that, then hopefully we just get more voluntary action or engagement, across the board. Events are so diverse, it's really hard to just stick out one example that would, work for everyone. But yeah. I think that just community at the end of the day, to sum this one up, I know we're getting short on time. It's empirically linked to retention. I mean, yeah. Bottom line. So it's just how in the heck do we use these pillars of community in sport to overlap with the events industry in this theoretical Venn diagram, which I've now created within my head? How do we do that?
How do we do that? And so a practical note people can maybe take away from them today. Okay, how can we get community, this idea of community from sports? Well, what we need to do is, first of all, create this idea of community through leveraging a common passion or a common goal, and then threading that element throughout each part of the event. So it could be social spaces, like David said. It could be embracing a theme or championing a spokesperson, or even having characters that are associated with your event that can really bring it to life. So there we go. That was the first point that you can learn from the sports industry. Is all about building communities. Let's move on to point number 2. We've only got about 7 minutes left, so we're going to have to speed through the next 2 points. So the second thing we think you can learn from the sports industry is harnessing digitization. Now, something that we're probably bored to death of talking about in the events industry is technology, and how can we become more digital, and how can we become more hybrid and more effective with our digital events communication. According to Deloitte, and I'm going to pull this stat down here. Technology is playing a larger role than ever in the lives of fans, opening the way for sports organizations to create new, innovative customer experiences. Partnering with broadcasters and new distribution platforms has given fans the experience they want and captured viewership across multiple devices, including mobile. The one fact that I found particularly interesting here is that 40.7% of global sports fans now stream live sports through digital platforms. That's such a huge number. I dread to even think. I mean, we said before, what was it? 1.5 billion people watch the World Cup. How many sports fans do we think there are in the world, and how many of them are looking at it through their mobile phone? So over the last 10 years, we've seen the amount of at-home experiences increase for sports fans. And another stat I've got here is that the Nielsen Sports report estimated that 39% of global fans watch non-live content related to a live sports event. That is phenomenal. Imagine if we could get 39% of our event audiences to watch non-live content related to our event after our event's done. How amazing would that be? I don't know, Dave, if you've got any thoughts on what we can be doing in the events industry to use those learnings and apply them and start to really drive this digitization of events.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think that at the end of the day, the thing that I love with digitization is that everything that we do, if it's through a screen, we leave a digital footprint. So every single event organizer out there can deploy a different, you know, set of mediums to collect or foster that digital engagement. You know, maybe it's an event app, maybe you have an event where you're broadcasting several sessions live. Maybe you have, you know, work with a lot of medical associations and we'll do our shows and we have a lot of on-demand content after the show for continued education stuff. But how to leverage it best, it would vary for every event organizer. But I think you're hitting on something really important that ties into community. As we start to digitize these things and create new forums for engagement, we create more places for our attendees and audience to interact and engage, stay up to date with our content, and hopefully, you know, continue driving our message in that 365 kind of feel. But again, it's digitization is everything, and it's all about data, and you know, I'm sure we'll get into that later. But yeah, it's a huge thing.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that, David. We will get to that. # spoiler alert. I think the thing that interests me about the way the sports world harnesses and leverages digitization is they really appeal to their newer and younger audiences. And we seem to forget about that in the events world. Just because we're running a B2B event doesn't mean that there's not an increased number of millennials and Gen Z starting to attend. And we need to bear that in mind. We need to be out there understanding what they want, how they consume their content, what type of content they like to consume. And we need to start using that, because at the moment we're not. And we're stuck in this state where we like to do things the way we've always done them. But soon Gen X are not going to be our target market if you're targeting key buyers. It's going to be millennials. Millennials already occupy, I think, 35% of key buyer markets, and soon it's going to be the majority. So we need to think, what are we doing to use innovation and to use tools to digitize our experiences and our events in the way that the next generation of attendees is going to appreciate and respond to? And that's probably my key takeaway from this part, is tap into this newer attendee demographic and these younger markets to leverage the format, to leverage the access and the technology innovations, because they're our key audiences of the future. So ask questions to understand what they want, how they consume it, and what you need to change to make sure you can apply your very own on-demand content or digital offering strategy that gets 40% of viewers, because that would be absolutely phenomenal, I think. Right, so we've got 4 minutes left. So should we move to learning number 3? David, over to you.
Yeah, so sports and data, analyzing in sports science. Goes without saying, the sports industry, sports in general, they do an amazing job of just literally quantifying everything. I think there's now a statistic to record anything an athlete can do on the field or on the court, even next-gen stats like plus minus player efficiency rating. You can literally know what happened without watching the game by looking at a stat sheet. But again, on the organizational side, there's all types of data that's collected with engagement and digitization to record fan engagement, from your ticket sales to TV numbers, app downloads, likes, shares, hashtags, pounds, or whatever you call them on the social medias. Like I said earlier, this is all tracked, you know, via a digital footprint. And I think, you know, the data, the important thing here is that the sports industry, really the professional sports industry is what I'm speaking to now, they take it to the next step. They don't just collect the data, but they harness it, they structure it and organize it so they can actually utilize that data. They can use it to enhance the in-game live experience, to increase their fan base, which you were talking about. Sports are amazing at always looking to grow their market share and find new fans, as well as creating new revenue opportunities. But yeah, I think the data, one example that I think is really phenomenal, it's because, or think of fantasy football, right? There's fantasy sports for every sport. I'll focus on football. All that is an elaborate gamified display of player statistics that we can now take ownership of. And that's all available and can exist because the data was there. Like all the player statistics were there, and the fan engagement and demand data was there. That the money could be invested to stand up these platforms to create this new, it's a new platform, it's a new arena for engagement. So again, just by having the data available, fantasy football was able to be stood up, creating these opportunities to view content, not at the live event, keep fans engaged, throughout the event cycle, throughout the year, all because it was there. Again, so just being able to harness that data is crazy. Yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think when we first talked about this, and for those that don't know, we do have a quick prep session for these calls just to obviously get our headlines in order and make sure we're both singing on the same hymn sheet. And David first mentioned to me this idea of first of all, fantasy football, but also gamification. And it's true, we actually have a tsunami of data. We are drowning in data in the events industry, but we don't really seem to be using it, at least not in a way that changes the experience of our attendees. And at the end of the day, with no attendees, we have no event. So it's absolutely integral that we put them central to everything we do. And by enhancing that experience, by using data to create some sort of gamified arena or tapping into the community to almost give perhaps a competitive level with our B2B events. Just because they're B2B doesn't mean they can't be fun. And just because they're B2B doesn't mean that they can't be an element of this gamification. And let's use that data we're collecting, apply it to enhance our attendee experience. And whether it's through engagement analytics or performance analytics, there's so many things that we could use. And it's actually really exciting. And I love the idea of it. We've got 1 more minute left, David. Anything else on data or sports science that you wanted to quickly cover?
You could even hit it from a completely different angle. You could look at data and asset management. Look at, in the sports industry, a great example, the Oakland Athletics in Major League Baseball, a cash-strapped organization. They deployed a data-centric model focused on finding undervalued players. So they used the data that existed within Major League Baseball and found underlying metrics that were predictive of player success. Like they devalued RBIs, they increased the value of on-base percentage and slugging percentage, and they were able to target players that were undervalued by the current market contracts. And it worked. They were able to pay the least and get the most efficiency and compete with the Yankees, who had a payroll of, maybe 10 to 20 times what they were working with. Check it out. It's a good movie. If you haven't seen it, my favorite, Brad Pitt, Moneyball. It's about Billy Bean. I think it's available on Amazon Prime. I'm not getting paid for this, unfortunately.
I have that book laying around. I've never read it. All the words that you just said to me made absolutely no sense. I thought you said the word slug maybe in there. But I'm sure those of you that know sport understand everything. But that's really it in terms of our key concept for this session. So we've talked about the 3 things we can really learn from the sports industry and apply it to the events world, the way that they leverage community, the way that they're really rolling with digitization, and of course, the way they're harnessing data. So 3 key things there, all with some practical elements in there too. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us for episode 4 of Made to Measure. Thank you so much, David, for sharing your passion for both events and sports, bringing them nicely to this intersection of this Made to Measure podcast. We hope all of you found it useful and will take away some of the trends we've discussed or ideas and maybe make your events function even better than it already was. If you have any other questions, please do feel free to reach out, either our email addresses, as you'll have seen as you registered, or you can reach out to us on LinkedIn. We're more than happy to help. Our next Made to Measure episode will be in March, so please do keep your eyes peeled for an episode on how to use feedback effectively. But for now, that's bye from us. So bye from me.
And bye from me.
And remember, events were made to measure. Thank you very much.